The Alabama sun was a brutal master. It showed no mercy as it beat down on Elijah's bent back, its heat soaking through his thin shirt like a punishment. At 16, his hands were already rough and scarred, his shoulders permanently shaped by the weight of cotton sacks. But the physical pain was familiar, almost a comfort compared to the new, chilling dread that had taken root in him since his mother was sold away. It began with the whispers. At first, they were easy to ignore. A faint hiss he blamed on the wind rustling through the endless rows of cotton. But soon they grew clearer. While he worked, his fingers bleeding from the sharp husks, a dry, raspy voice would slip into his ear. The old oak. By the creek. He waits for you. The old oak was a place everyone avoided. It stood near the muddy creek that bordered the northern edge of the plantation, a massive, gnarled tree that seemed to suck the light from the air around it. Stories were told of Isaiah, a man who'd been hanged from its thickest branch for the crime of learning his letters. No one went near it, not even the overseers with their whips and cruel confidence. But the whispers pulled at Elijah, tugging his mind toward that tree like a fish on a hook. At night, crammed into the hot, airless darkness of the slave quarters, the voices found him again. He knows your name, Elijah. He'd jerk awake, his heart pounding, sweat cooling on his skin. Around him, the others slept on, their breathing a steady, unconscious rhythm. He was the only one awake, the only one listening. The fear was a cold stone in his gut. He started moving through his days in a daze, his lack of focus earning him sharp lashes from the overseer's whip. The stinging pain was almost a relief, a real physical sensation to ground him against the creeping terror in his mind. The breaking point came on a day when the air was so thick with humidity it was hard to breathe. He was dragging a heavy sack toward the wagon when the whisper came, not faint or distant, but clear and urgent right beside his ear. The child with the laugh like bells. He comes for her at moon high. Elijah froze. The child with the laugh like bells was little Zinnia, a girl no more than 5 years old. Her giggles were a rare, precious sound in the quarters, a tiny spark of joy in the overwhelming gloom. This was not a memory the land was replaying. This was a warning, a promise, a fear colder than any he had ever known seized him. He knew with a certainty that left no room for doubt that he had to see. He had to go to the oak. That evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance and the sky turned a sickly green, he slipped away from the quarters. The storm was coming, and the wind was already beginning to howl. He moved quickly, his heart hammering against his ribs as he approached the creek. The great oak was a writhing silhouette against the flashes of lightning. As he neared, a figure detached itself from the tree's deepest shadow. It was the shape of a man, but woven from darkness and memory. Its form seemed to shift and curl like smoke, and where its eyes should have been, 2 points of cold, pale light burned. It was Isaiah, Elijah's feet rooted to the spot. He couldn't run. He couldn't even breathe. The spirit did not speak with a voice that could be heard. Instead, the words formed directly in Elijah's mind, clear and sharp. You hear the soil? You hear us? Elijah could only manage a weak, terrified nod. This land is a prison, the thought voice continued, and a wave of ancient sorrow and rage washed over Elijah, so potent it made his knees buckle. Our bones are its foundation. Our pain is its mortar. We cannot rest. The chain holds us here. Images, not of sight, but of pure feeling, flooded Elijah's mind. The searing pain of a lash, the crushing despair of a family torn apart, the bitter taste of hope extinguished. He felt the collective agony of every soul buried in the unmarked graves across the plantation. A vast ocean of suffering that threatened to pull him under. The chain must be broken. Isaiah's voice cut through the torrent. You are the listener. You are the key. How? Elijah gasped aloud, his voice a stranger to him. I'm nobody. I can't break anything. The spirit's form solidified for a moment. An arm of darkness pointed back toward the plantation house. The chain is not of iron. It is of memory, of injustice left to fester. The one who forged it still walks here. His sin anchors us, another image seared into Elijah's mind. The plantation owner. Master Williams, but younger, his face twisted with a cruel pride. Standing right under this oak with a noose in his hand, he must remember. He must feel the weight. You must make him see. He'll kill me, Elijah whispered, despair gripping his heart. The spirit's ember eyes flared with an intense, cold light. He has already killed us. We will lend you our strength. We will walk with you, but you must be our hands. You must be our voice." Before Elijah could form a reply, a new sound ripped through the night, the frantic, panicked clanging of the plantation's emergency bell from the direction of the slave quarters. The spirit of Isaiah dissolved into the shadows, its presence vanishing so abruptly that Elijah stumbled forward. The connection was broken. The storm was no longer just in the sky. It had come to the quarters. He turned and ran, his fear for himself now replaced by a more immediate terror. As he burst into the clearing, he saw the commotion. People were gathered in a tight, fearful circle. In the center, old man Moses, the community's storyteller, the keeper of their history, was on the ground. His body was convulsing, and his eyes were wide, staring at something only he could see. He was clawing at the air, his words a frantic, gibbering mess. "He just started screaming," a woman cried, clutching her children. "Pointing at the well. Said he saw faces in the water. Said they were calling his name." Elijah stared at old man Moses, a cold certainty settling deep in his soul. This was no fit. This was not madness. The whispers had stopped. The spirits were no longer just speaking, they were acting, and Isaiah's final command echoed in his mind, a mission now stained with the fresh horror before him. "You must be our hands." The haunting had begun in earnest, and Elijah, the listener, was now trapped at its very center. Cast a pall over the quarters. His terrified babbling about faces in the water and cold hands pulling sent shivers through everyone. He was tied down to his cot, his eyes rolling back in his head, muttering the same phrase. The chain tightens. Elijah felt the truth of those words. The whispers had fallen silent, but a new, heavier presence had taken their place. It was a feeling of being watched, a cold spot in the air that followed him as he worked the fields. The other enslaved people began to give him a wide berth, their eyes wary. They sensed the change in him, the shadow that now clung to his footsteps. 3 nights after his encounter under the oak, he was jolted awake not by a sound, but by a suffocating sense of dread. The air in the quarters was frigid. In the faint moonlight filtering through the cracks, he saw his breath form pale clouds. He was the only one awake, the only one shivering. A dark, viscous liquid began to seep up from the hard-packed dirt floor. It wasn't water. It was thick and dark, like old blood, and it carried the metallic scent of rust and the sweet, rotten smell of forgotten graves. It pooled around his thin palate, and as it touched the rough fabric, a single clear word formed in his mind, spoken in Isaiah's resonant thought voice. Now. Terror seized him, but a force greater than his fear pulled him to his feet. He stepped over the sleeping forms around him, his bare feet avoiding the dark liquid as it slowly receded back into the earth. Its purpose served. He was a sleepwalker, compelled by a will not his own. He didn't head for the fields or the creek. He was drawn toward the heart of the plantation, the main house. He moved like a ghost through the oppressive darkness, the cicadas' drone falling silent as he passed. He found himself standing before the grand porch of Master William's house. A single second-floor window was illuminated, the master's study. As Elijah stared up, a shadow fell across the lit window, a tall, gaunt silhouette that was not Master William's. It was the shadow from the oak. Inside, a moment later, a glass shattered. A raw, terrified scream tore through the quiet night. It was Master William's. Elijah stood frozen, watching as the shadow in the window dissolved. The compulsion that had guided him vanished, leaving him empty and exposed in the dangerous darkness. He had been the vessel. He had delivered the haunting to its source. From the house he could hear the master's frantic rising shouts. "Get it away from me! Get it out!" The chain had tightened indeed. The first blow had been struck, and Elijah knew, with a sinking heart, that he was now irrevocably bound to the vengeful spirit's grim purpose. There was no turning back. The plantation awoke to a new fear. Master Williams, once a figure of unshakable cruelty, was now a trembling ghost of a man. He refused to leave his room, his shouts echoing through the house about a hanged man in the corner and voices from the walls. The overseers tried to maintain order, but a palpable dread had seeped into the very soil. Elijah felt the spirit's satisfaction like a cold fire in his own veins. That night, as he lay awake, Isaiah's voice returned, not as a whisper, but a clear command. The ledger? In his desk. It holds the first sin. Bring it to the oak, the ledger. Elijah knew it. It was the book where names were recorded, not just of the living, but of those bought and sold. It was the record of their suffering. Driven by a courage that was not his own, Elijah slipped into the silent big house. The master's study was empty, reeking of spilled whiskey and fear. The ledger lay in a drawer, its leather cover cold. As he touched it, a jolt of pain and memory, 1,000 sorrows, shot up his arm. He ran to the oak, the book clutched to his chest. Isaiah stood waiting, more solid now, his form flickering with a pale light. Elijah placed the ledger at the roots of the tree. The ground trembled. The shadows around the oak deepened, and from them other forms emerged, faint, shimmering outlines of the lost and forgotten. They gathered around the book, their silent presence a verdict. In the distance, a final piercing scream tore from the house, then abruptly cut off. At the oak, the spirits looked not at the ledger, but at Elijah. Their gaze was a weight and a question. The first debt was collected. The reckoning had begun, and Elijah was now forever a part of it. Silence fell over the plantation. The master's final scream still hung in the air, but no one came running. No horns blew, no overseers shouted. Only the whisper of the wind through the cotton fields remained. Under the oak, the spectral forms began to fade, their purpose fulfilled. But Isaiah remained, his form now clearer, almost solid. He looked at Elijah, and for the first time, the voice in Elijah's mind was not a command, but an acknowledgement. The first link is broken, but the chain is long. The ember-like eyes shifted from Elijah to the ledger lying at the foot of the tree. As Elijah watched, the book began to change. The dark polished leather cracked and peeled as if aging centuries in moments. The pages, filled with the cold accounting of human lives, yellowed and crumbled into dust. The names faded, one by one, not just from the paper, but from the weight of history itself. It was not destruction. It was absolution. A warmth spread through Elijah's chest, a feeling he had almost forgotten. It was not joy, but a profound, quiet peace. The oppressive dread that had clung to the air was gone. The land itself seemed to breathe a sigh of release. He looked at Isaiah. The spirit's form was now translucent, glowing with a soft, gentle light. The rage was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, eternal calm. "Your listening is done," Isaiah's voice echoed, soft as a breeze. "Our voice is now your own." With those final words, the spirit dissolved into a shower of faint, shimmering motes of light that rose into the branches of the great oak and vanished. Elijah stood alone. The early dawn light was breaking, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. He looked toward the plantation house, silent and still. He looked at the fields, empty of workers. He looked at his own hands, no longer trembling. He was free. They all were. But it was not a freedom given by a piece of paper or a proclamation. It was a freedom won from the soil itself, paid for in memory and sealed by a justice older than any man. The chain of injustice was not shattered by a single act, but its strongest, most cruel link was gone. Elijah turned his back on the oak and walked toward the quarters, not as a listener, but as a man. The sun rose, and for the first time, its warmth felt like a promise. The silence in the quarters was not of fear, but of awe. People stood in small groups, their eyes wide, watching Elijah as he walked back from the creek. They had heard the final scream. They felt the change in the air. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on them for generations was simply gone. Old man Moses was sitting up on his cot, his eyes clear for the first time in days. He looked at Elijah and gave a slow, knowing nod. No words were needed. As the sun rose higher, its light seemed different, cleaner, warmer. It touched the worn wooden walls of the quarters and the endless fields of cotton, not as a taskmaster's glare, but as a blanket of hope. No overseer came to blow the morning horn. No whip cracked. The system that had imprisoned them had lost its head, and in that void, a new, fragile possibility was born. Elijah stood at the edge of the field, the others gathering around him. He looked at their faces, faces etched with pain, but now alight with a hesitant, dawning understanding. They were free. But freedom was an empty field. It was a road they would have to build themselves. He looked down the dusty path that led away from the plantation, a path into an unknown and dangerous world. Then he looked back at his people. "The chain is broken here," Elijah said, his voice quiet but firm. "But our road is just beginning." He took a step, not toward the path, but toward the others. Their journey would not be one of whispers and vengeance, but of their own voices and their own strength. The first true day of their lives had finally dawned. Elijah did not lead them down the dusty path that day. Instead, he stood before the people, the morning sun warming his face. "We are free," he said, his voice carrying a new strength. "But freedom is not a path. It is a road we build with our own hands." They did not flee in a panicked rush. They moved with purpose. They gathered what little they had: tools, food, cherished memories whispered from mother to daughter. They stood together at the edge of the plantation, a community forged in suffering, now facing an uncertain future. Elijah took one last look back. The great oak stood silent, a witness to their past, but no longer a chain. He felt no hatred, only a quiet farewell. The spirits were at peace. Now it was their turn to live. He turned and faced the horizon. He did not know what lay ahead, only that they would face it together. A woman placed a hand on his shoulder. A child grasped his hand. "We walk together," someone said, and they did. They walked away from the fields of sorrow, not as broken souls, but as a people reborn. Their steps were slow but steady, leaving behind the shadows, moving toward the light of their own making. The road was long, but for the first time it was theirs.